on Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's novel, Purple Hibiscus, and explaining the consequences of lacking a voice. In Purple Hibiscus, shy and quiet 15-year-old Kambili, who is among the higher classes of society in Nigeria, narrates the story. Her pampered though oppressive home life restricts her ability to communicate with those around her, like her school friends on page 49, when she is glad that one girl is nice to her, even though she is awkward and tongue-tied. In this scene, for instance, Adichie characterizes Kambili as unable to express herself to others because of her oppression at home, especially in her relationship with her abusive father. On page 32, she describes this abuse. Swift, heavy thuds on my parents' hand-carved bedroom door. I imagined the door had gotten stuck and Papa was trying to open it. If I imagined it hard enough, then it would be true. And later, we cleaned up the trickle of blood. As Kambili recalls what she heard, it becomes clear that the reason for Kambili's lack of voice is her fear of her abusive father. And this fear causes her not to speak, which causes a crisis of identity, or really a lack of identity. Kambili's lack of voice affects how she interacts with those she should have a rapport with, like her cousin Amaka. But the drastically different parenting that they experience forces the girls to have the awkward interactions that they do, and these interactions support my thesis. Adichie contrasts Kambili's view of herself with that of her cousin. The stronger Amaka fills in characterization for her muted cousin. Kambili's lack of voice leads to Amaka forming opinions and judgments about her based solely on appearance and action, which results in Kambili forming to Amaka's impression of her instead of creating her own identity. Now to the worksheet. It's my goal in this presentation for you all to understand the connections in these charts and how through cause and effect, Kambili's lack of voice leads to her lack of identity. First, Kambili lacks a voice. Then, Amaka misinterprets her reserved nature for snobbery, which goes into Kambili begins to think like Amaka, matching her tone. Kambili takes notice of the poorer environment of Ifeoma's house, which then causes Kambili's superior thoughts then translate to her actions, conforming to Amaka's perception of her, an identity that is not consistent with her actual reasons for her silence. Now, in the following scene between Tally and myself, this progression is illustrated in Amaka and Kambili's initial interaction upon Kambili's arrival at Amaka's house. Now, after each scene, we're going to pause, and you all will be asked to identify which parts of the chart Kambili is at that point to show her progression through the thesis. And now I would like to introduce Tally Murphy as Amaka and myself as Kambili.
Kambili, I'm sure you think Nasuka is uncivilized compared to Inugu. It must be such a sacrifice for you to come visit us. I told Mom to stop forcing you to come.
We wanted to come. Look at how she just smiles into the mirror. That thin, patronizing smile. I should not have bothered lying to her, but she just doesn't like me. Look at her desk. It's so unorganized, and her mirror is cracked. I wonder if that's even useful. And stop. Now, look at the thesis chart on the worksheet, and can you identify where in the chart she is at this point? Be aware there can be a couple.
Possibly the last one, E.
The last one, E, and anywhere else? B. D. All right, I identified actually the first four for A and B. When Amaka speaks into the mirror, she asks questions without really asking them, with interrogative sentences showing how she knows the answer to the question, so the reason she's asking it is really just to state her ideas. Her reflection in the mirror then serves as a symbol for her identity, because Amaka really has her own well-defined awareness of herself, and so, like seeing her reflection in the mirror. Kambili only sees Amaka's reflection and not her own, showing that she lacks personal ideas of herself and only measures herself against what Amaka thinks of herself. Now, C, I think someone said C. Amaka's smile, the thin, patronizing smile into the mirror, then has Kambili make a thought that's in sync with Amaka's judgment of her, revealing that Amaka's reflection is imposing itself on Kambili, like seeing your reflection in a mirror. And someone else said D. Kambili then looks down at the table, and she notices the cracked mirror on Amaka's desk. She's then taking that snobbish attitude that Amaka is imposing on her by recognizing the imperfection on Amaka's desk as a snobby person would. And now the next.
This is my stereo, but I'm sure it's nothing compared to the sound system you have in your room in Enugu.
I wish I could tell her that I didn't have any kind of sound system in my room back home. But I'm not sure she'd be pleased to hear that, just as she would not be pleased to hear if I did have one. No, very nice. And stop. What part of the
Lack of voice.
lack of voice? Yes. And all right. Well, I identified part C. C, where Amaka's comment really means to emphasize how snobby she believes Kambili to be, establishing a sarcastic tone. The structure of the comment is mirrored in Kambili's following thought, almost word for word, and so likewise adopts that sarcastic tone. And the effect of that parallelism is the transfer of Amaka's tone to Kambili, from her words to Kambili's thoughts, revealing the power of another's attitude on the voiceless. And now we all sit down to dinner. The dining room table is made of the kind of wood that cracks in dry weather, and the outermost layer is shedding off the rest of the table like a molten cricket, brown slices curling up from the surface. Even the dining chairs are mismatched. Four are plain wood, kind of chairs in my classroom, and the other two are black and padded. Nothing like what we have at home. Now stop. What aspects on the chart did you see in that small monologue? D. Yes. All right. The descriptions in this quote all contain images of cheap things. The wood that cracks in the dry weather creates the effect the table's old and falling apart. In addition, words with low-quality connotations are used to describe other objects in Ifeoma's house. The dining chairs are described as mismatched, made out of plain wood or black color. The connotations of these words are negative and bland, creating that effect that Camille is unimpressed with what she's seeing, and therefore giving her thoughts that superior tone. In addition, fitting in with D, the simile of the cricket skin table is an unrefined image, as it's comparing where they eat to the dead skin of an insect. Now, the rather unsanitary comparison adds the superior tone of Kambili's thoughts. And now for the final scene.
What's wrong with the food, Kambili? Though I'm sure you have very different meals at your house.
I look down at the jollof rice, fried plantains, and half the drumstick on my plate, and try to concentrate, try to get the food down. Oh, look, plates too are mismatched. No, it's just, I'm not really hungry. And stop. What aspects did you see in that final scene?
E.
E, yes. And possibly one more. C, maybe one more? D. Yay, there it is. All right. The similar images of poverty appear in this scene as the previous one, like the half a drumstick, and noticing that the plates too are mismatched. But both imply that the family can't afford the kind of life that Kambili is used to, and her superior tone continues. And now for E. The asyndeton, or the lack of conjugation, in tried to concentrate, tried to get the food down, creates a rush effect on the sentence and a level of desperation in trying to eat the food. Now, that sense of desperation and hardship in eating, in addition to the images of poverty in the food, reveal Kambili's embrace of the snobby attitude. Now, as the scene progresses, it's clear how Kambili develops in line with the thesis and the identity Amaka creates for her. But the reason for her lack of voice, the looking down on Amaka, further complicates her internal conflict of identity. She has many conflicting ideas that are set upon her, but her embrace of Amaka's snobby identity of her appears in the following interaction between Amaka's friends and Kambili. Now, we refer to the passage on 141. The characterization of Kambili in this interaction with Amaka's friends emphasized the result of this new snobby identity. She says, I wanted to talk with Amaka and her friends, to laugh with them so much that I would start to jump up and down in one place the way they did. But my lips held stubbornly together. I did not want to stutter, so I started to cough and then ran out into the toilet. Now, the parallelism in this first sentence reads like a list of things that she wants and establishes that complaining tone. And it also characterizes Kambili as yearning to fit in and belong. But the personification of her lips refusing to open and join in, following the childish image of her jumping up and down with them, implies her disapproval towards such behavior, as it follows directly after that image. Now, the covering of her discomfort in leaving the room then becomes less a reaction to her inability to communicate, but more her new snobby identity stopping her from joining in. Now, the meaning of this passage works as a response to the performance that you just saw. Her inability to join in with Amaka's silly friends illustrate how her snobby identity affects her actions. She can't express anything on her own, and so is influenced by those who do speak, like Amaka, and so then adopts those ideas and conforms to Amaka's perception of her, a snob with a superior attitude. This passage then shows the result of her conflict of identity, her not being able to act on her own accord, and allowing opinions to control her actions more than her own experience. This passage, as well as the performance, then conclude the thesis chart that's on your worksheet and illustrate the final consequences of lacking a voice. But what is the meaning of this conflict of identity and lack of voice? Well, the thesis chart that connects to purple hibiscus supports the connection between the lack of voice and a lack of identity. Such a connection then establishes the theme of power in communication. Therefore, Kambili's internal conflict of identity and lack of individuality formed from her ideas adds to this theme of power in communication, and the lack of voice leads to lack of identity and lack of power in a relationship. And what Adichie establishes through this theme is the power that someone with a voice has over someone without a voice. The lack of voice leads to lack of identity, and lack of identity then you can't express yourself. You can't explain your ideas to the world, and therefore others with a voice can take advantage of you, as Amaka did with Kambili. But Kambili's internal conflict, the feeling that the reason she actually can't speak is because her fear of being judged, her fear of the abuse. But from Amaka's interactions with her and her judgment of her, that internal conflict is further complicated. She can't speak, but for another reason, a new reason now, which is explained through this theme of power in communication. Thank you.